The storm that rolled across the Texas coast that September night in 1878 carried fury in its winds and vengeance in its waves. But Yates Zimmerman had weathered worse in his 29 years of living at the edge of civilization. The lighthouse keeper stood at his post on the rocky outcropping where the Brazos River met the Gulf of Mexico, maintaining the beam that warned ships away from the treacherous shoals, when he saw the schooner fighting against the tempest. He watched through his spyglass as the vessel fought desperately, sails shredded, masts splintering like kindling, and then the inevitable happened. The ship struck the hidden reef with a sound that carried even over the howling wind, a crack like thunder that spoke of wood surrendering to stone. Yates grabbed his rope and lantern, racing down the spiral stairs of the lighthouse with practiced speed. Rain lashed his face as he emerged into the storm, boots finding purchase on the slick rocks he had navigated since he was a boy learning the trade from his father. The wreckage was already washing toward shore, planks and barrels tumbling in the surf, and then he saw her. A woman clung to a piece of the mainmast, her dark hair plastered to her face, dress billowing around her like the petals of some drowning flower. She was losing her grip, fingers slipping on the wet wood with each wave that crashed over her. He did not think. Thinking would have told him the rocks were too dangerous, the current too strong, the chances too slim. Instead, Yates plunged into the churning water, rope tied around his waist and secured to an iron ring he had bolted into the cliff face for just such emergencies. The cold hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath, but he pushed through it, swimming with powerful strokes toward the woman. She went under just as he reached her, and he dove beneath the surface, hands searching blindly until they found fabric, then an arm, then he was pulling her up, and she was gasping and coughing and clinging to him with surprising strength. Getting back to shore took everything he had. The waves seemed determined to claim them both, smashing them against rocks that opened cuts on his shoulders and back. But Yates Zimmerman had been forged in this harsh place where land met water, and he refused to let the sea win. His boots finally found solid ground, and he hauled the woman up onto the rocks, then higher, until they collapsed together on the wet grass beyond the reach of the waves. She was unconscious now, lips blue, not breathing. Yates rolled her onto her side and pressed on her back the way his father had taught him, once, twice, 3 times, and then she was coughing up seawater, choking and gasping and alive. He gathered her into his arms and carried her up the path to the lighthouse, rain still pouring down, her head lolling against his chest. The keeper's quarters attached to the lighthouse were sparse but dry and warm. Yates laid the woman on his bed and lit the stove, building the fire high. She needed dry clothes, but he had nothing suitable, so he wrapped her in every blanket he owned after carefully removing her sodden dress and petticoats, averting his eyes as much as possible despite the circumstances. Her skin was cold as marble, and he worried about how long she had been in that water before he reached her. He checked the lighthouse beacon, confirmed it was still burning true, then returned to sit beside the unconscious woman. In the lamplight, he could see she was beautiful, even with her face pale and drawn from her ordeal. She looked to be in her mid-20s, with fine features and long, dark lashes resting against her cheeks. A small cut on her forehead had bled down the side of her face, and he cleaned it gently with a damp cloth. Yates had lived alone in this lighthouse for 5 years, ever since his father died and left him the position. Before that, he had spent 3 years drifting, working as a cowboy on the ranches that sprawled across the Texas interior, driving cattle north on the long trails to Kansas, sleeping under stars and living rough. He had been good at it, respected by the men he rode with, but when his father took sick, Yates had come home to care for him. After the old man passed, staying had seemed easier than leaving. The lighthouse needed a keeper, and Yates needed something to anchor him before he drifted too far. But the loneliness ate at him some nights. He would stand at the top of the lighthouse, watching the beams sweep across the dark water, and wonder if this was all his life would ever be. Maintain the light. Order supplies from the mainland once a month. Grow older in this place where the only voices he heard were the wind and the waves and occasionally the gulls. Now this woman lay breathing in his bed, and he felt something shift inside his chest, some door opening that he had thought sealed shut. She woke near dawn. Yates had dozed in his chair, exhausted from the rescue, and her small sound of confusion brought him instantly alert. Her eyes were green, he noticed, a striking shade like new leaves in spring, and they were wide with fear and disorientation. "Easy," he said softly, holding up his hands. "You are safe. You were shipwrecked. I pulled you from the water." She stared at him, then looked around the small room, taking in the stone walls, the porthole window showing gray morning light, the simple furnishings. Her hand went to her throat, finding her bare skin, and she pulled the blankets tighter around herself. "My dress," she said, voice hoarse from the seawater she had swallowed. "Drying by the fire," Yates said, gesturing to where he had draped her garments over a makeshift line. "I am sorry for the impropriety, but you would have caught your death in those wet clothes. I tried to be respectful." She studied him for a long moment, and something in his face must have reassured her because she relaxed slightly. "Thank you," she said, "for saving my life. I remember the ship breaking apart and the water and then nothing until now." "What is your name?" Yates asked. "Amelia," she said. "Amelia Reeves. I was traveling from New Orleans to Galveston. My trunk, my belongings, they are all gone, are they not? I am sorry. The ship went down hard. If anything washes up, I will find it, but the sea does not often give back what it takes." Amelia closed her eyes, and he saw her throat work as she swallowed hard. When she opened her eyes again, they were bright with unshed tears, but her voice was steady. "Were there others? Other survivors?" Yates shook his head slowly. "I have not found anyone else. When the storm passes, I will search the beach properly, but I saw no one in the water besides you." A tear tracked down her cheek then, and she wiped it away with the edge of the blanket. "The captain was a good man. The crew was kind to me during the voyage, I had hoped." "I am sorry," Yates said again, feeling the inadequacy of the words. He had seen enough death in his years to know that sometimes there was nothing to say that made it better. They sat in silence for a while, the sound of rain still pattering against the lighthouse filling the space between them. Finally, Amelia spoke again. "What is your name? I should know the name of the man who saved my life." "Yates Zimmerman. I keep the lighthouse here, have for 5 years now, alone." "Alone." She looked at him with those green eyes, and he wondered what she saw. A rough man with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands, hair too long, and manners gone rusty from lack of use. He was tall and broad-shouldered from years of hard work, with his father's strong jaw and his mother's dark eyes. Women in town, on his rare visits, sometimes looked at him with interest, but he had never pursued anything. What would be the point? He could not ask a woman to share this isolated existence. "How long until I can return to the mainland?" Amelia asked. "The supply boat comes in 2 weeks. Before that, the waters are too rough and unpredictable this time of year. Even when it is calm, the shoals make navigation dangerous. That is why the lighthouse is here." 2 weeks, she repeated softly. "I have imposed on your hospitality terribly, Mr. Zimmerman." "Yates," he said. "And you have imposed nothing. You are welcome to stay as long as needed. I have supplies enough for 2. I have no money to pay you. Everything I had was on that ship. I do not want payment for helping someone in need. You rest today. Recover your strength. Tomorrow we will worry about practical matters." Amelia nodded, exhaustion already pulling at her features. Yates stood and moved to the stove, ladling some of the fish stew he had made the day before into a bowl. "You should eat something. Not much, just a little to settle your stomach." She managed a few bites before her eyes began to close again. Yates took the bowl and pulled the blankets up around her shoulders. "Sleep," he said quietly. "You are safe here." The storm blew itself out over the next day and night. Yates maintained his duties, climbing the lighthouse stairs every 4 hours to tend the light, winding the clockwork mechanism that rotated the lens, trimming the wick, checking the oil reservoir. Between those duties, he searched the beach and found heartbreaking little. A sailor's cap. A leather satchel with ruined papers inside. Broken planks branded with the ship's name, Gulf Star. He found no more survivors and no more bodies, which he supposed was a mercy. The sea had taken them deep. Amelia recovered quickly. By the 3rd day she was up and dressed in her mended clothes, insisting on helping around the lighthouse. Yates protested that she was a guest and still recovering, but she was stubborn. "I cannot simply lie about while you work," she said firmly. "I will go mad with nothing to do. Please, let me help." So she cooked, which was a revelation. Yates had been living on basic fare for so long that he had forgotten food could taste like something other than sustenance. Amelia took his simple ingredients and created meals that filled the keeper's quarters with warmth and good smells. She mended his clothes, horrified by the state of his socks and shirts. She cleaned with a thoroughness that made him realize how much he had let things slide. In the evenings they talked. At first the conversation was stilted, two strangers feeling out the boundaries of unexpected intimacy. But gradually, the words came easier. Amelia told him about growing up in Charleston, about her father who had been a shipping merchant before he died, about her mother who remarried a man Amelia could not abide. She had been traveling to Galveston to live with her aunt and find work as a teacher or governess, seeking independence and a fresh start. Yates told her about his childhood in the lighthouse, about learning to read by the light of the beacon while his father told stories of ships and storms, about his mother who died when he was 12, and how he and his father had managed alone after that, about his years as a cowboy, the cattle drives and trail towns, the vast emptiness of the prairie that had called to something in his soul. "Why did you come back?" Amelia asked one evening as they sat watching the sunset through the keeper's quarters window. "My father needed me," Yates said. "And after he died, I suppose I needed this place. Out on the trail, you are always moving, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. Here I know every rock, every tide. There is something comforting in that. But you are alone," Amelia said softly. "I am," Yates agreed. He looked at her, sitting in his chair with a cup of tea in her hands, the lamplight catching in her dark hair, and felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. "I was alone." The air between them changed then, charged with something unspoken. Amelia met his eyes and color rose in her cheeks. She looked away first, setting down her teacup with careful precision. "I should prepare for bed," she said quietly. "Tomorrow I want to help you with the garden you mentioned. Those vegetables will not weed themselves." Yates had given up his bed to Amelia and made himself a pallet on the floor, insisting it was no hardship. He had slept on harder ground during cattle drives. But that night, he lay awake long after her breathing had evened out into sleep, thinking about the 2 weeks that had suddenly become not nearly enough time. The days developed a rhythm. Yates taught Amelia about the lighthouse, showing her how to tend the light, explaining the mathematics of the lens and the precision required to keep the beam at the correct intensity. She was quick to learn, asking intelligent questions that showed she understood not just the mechanics, but the purpose behind them. "You are keeping people safe," she said one afternoon as they stood in the lamp room at the top of the lighthouse, the Gulf of Mexico spreading out endlessly before them. "Every night, this light might be the difference between life and death for someone out there." "It is good work," Yates said. "Honest work. My father used to say we are guardians at the edge of the world." Amelia turned to look at him, the wind from the open windows tugging at her hair. "I think he was right. You are a guardian, Yates Zimmerman. You guard against the darkness." Something in the way she said his name made his pulse quicken. They were standing close in the cramped space of the lamp room, and he was acutely aware of her nearness, the scent of her skin, the curve of her mouth. He wanted to kiss her so badly it was a physical ache, but he held himself still. "We should go down," he said, voice rougher than intended. "The afternoon supply check needs to be done." If she noticed his abruptness, she did not comment on it, but as she moved past him toward the stairs, her hand brushed his arm and the touch felt deliberate. They worked in the garden together, Amelia's skirts pinned up to keep them from dragging in the dirt. The garden was Yates's pride, coaxed into existence in the thin soil through years of adding seaweed and composted scraps. Tomatoes and squash, herbs and greens, tough plants that could handle the salt air. Amelia had a natural way with growing things, and under her attention the garden seemed to flourish even more. "My mother loved gardens," she said as she carefully removed weeds from around the tomato plants. "She said they were proof that with enough patience and care you could make beauty anywhere." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman," Yates said. "She is." Amelia sat back on her heels, a streak of dirt across her cheek. "Before she remarried. After that, she became someone I did not recognize, so eager to please her new husband that she forgot about her daughter." "Is that why you left?" "He wanted me to marry his business partner, a man 3 times my age who looked at me like I was a possession to be acquired. My mother insisted it was a good match, that I was foolish to refuse, so I wrote to my aunt in Galveston and made plans to leave." "I am sorry," Yates said. "That must have been difficult." "It was liberating," Amelia corrected, a fierce light in her eyes. "I realized I could make my own choices, forge my own path. And then the ship went down and I thought my path was going to be very short indeed." "But it was not," Yates said quietly. "You are here. You survived. Because you saved me." She reached out and took his hand, her fingers slender and dirt-stained against his rougher, larger ones. "I have been thinking about that, about how close I came to dying and how you risked your life to pull me from the water. Why did you do it? You did not know me. I could have been anyone." Yates looked down at their joined hands. "I could not stand by and watch someone drown, not when I had the means to help, and I am glad I did, Amelia. I am glad you are here." "So am I," she whispered. The kiss happened naturally, inevitably. Yates leaned in and Amelia rose to meet him, and their lips touched softly at first, then with growing heat. She tasted like salt air and tomatoes from the garden, and Yates felt something in his chest break open, all the loneliness of the past 5 years pouring out and being replaced with this fierce, bright feeling. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Amelia rested her forehead against his. "I should not have done that," she said. "I am imposing on your hospitality, and now I am throwing myself at you like some shameless woman." "You are not throwing yourself anywhere," Yates said firmly. "And if anyone should apologize, it is me. You are under my protection and I should not take advantage." "What if I want to be taken advantage of?" Amelia asked, a smile playing at her lips. Yates groaned. "You are making this very difficult." "Good," she said and kissed him again. They were more careful after that, both aware of the precarious situation. Amelia was an unmarried woman alone with a man, her reputation at risk even if there was no one around to see. But the attraction between them was undeniable, growing stronger with each passing day. They found excuses to touch, hands brushing as they cooked together, shoulders bumping as they sat reading in the evening. The air in the keeper's quarters felt charged, every glance and word weighted with meaning. A week after the shipwreck, Yates took Amelia fishing. They walked down to a sheltered cove where he kept a small boat, and he rowed them out beyond the breakers to where the water ran deep and blue. Amelia had never fished before, and Yates showed her how to bait the hook and cast the line, standing behind her with his arms around hers, guiding her movements. They caught 3 good-sized redfish, and Amelia laughed with delight when she hauled in the first one, her face alight with joy. Yates could not remember the last time he had heard laughter in this place, and he realized he wanted to hear it every day for the rest of his life. "I have a confession to make," Amelia said as they sat in the gently rocking boat, their lines in the water. "What is that?" Yates asked. "I am terrified of the supply boat coming, because it means I have to leave and I do not want to leave." Yates's heart hammered in his chest. "What if you did not have to?" She turned to look at him, hope and fear warring in her expression. "What are you saying?" He set down his fishing pole and took both her hands in his. "I am saying that these past days with you have been the happiest of my life. I am saying that I was alone for so long I forgot what it felt like to have someone to talk to share meals with, to simply exist alongside. And I am saying that if you leave, this lighthouse will go back to being just a building instead of a home." "Yates," she breathed, "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a short time, but out here, time moves differently. Every moment is sharp and clear because there are no distractions, no pretense. I see you, Amelia Reeves, and I am asking if you might consider staying, not as a guest, but as my wife." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you. I thought I was traveling to Galveston to start a new life, but maybe the storm brought me exactly where I needed to be." Yates pulled her into his arms and kissed her there in the boat, the Gulf waters rocking them gently, the sun warm on their skin. When they finally drew apart, he realized he was grinning like a fool. "We will need to get you into town to buy a proper dress," he said, "and we need a preacher. The supply boat can take us back to the mainland when it comes." "I do not need a fancy dress," Amelia said. "I just need you." They rowed back to shore hand in hand, and that night, Yates continued to sleep on his pallet on the floor because he was determined to do things properly. But they sat up late talking about the future, making plans, and the keeper's quarters felt full of possibility. The supply boat arrived exactly on schedule, a sturdy sloop captained by a grizzled sailor named Morrison, who had been making the run to the lighthouse for 15 years. He was surprised to find Yates had a companion, and even more surprised to hear they were engaged. "Well, I will be damned," Morrison said, shaking Yates's hand. "Figured you would grow old and die alone out here, Zimmerman. Glad to see I was wrong. Miss Reeves, you are a brave woman to take this one on." "I am a lucky woman," Amelia corrected with a smile. They sailed back to the mainland together, Yates leaving the lighthouse dark for the first time in years. It felt strange and wrong, but there was no help for it. The trip could not be made in a single day. They would have to spend at least one night on shore. The nearest town of any size was Brazeria, a rough settlement that served the cotton plantations and cattle ranches of the surrounding area. It had a general store, a saloon, a small church, and not much else. The preacher was a Methodist circuit rider named Reverend Holt, who happened to be in town, which Yates took as a sign. They were married 2 days later in the small church, with Morrison and the store owner's wife standing as witnesses. Amelia wore a simple blue dress purchased from the general store, and Yates had gotten a haircut and a shave at the barber. It was not fancy, but when Yates said his vows and slipped his mother's ring onto Amelia's finger, he meant every word with his whole heart. I, Yates Zimmerman, take you, Amelia Reeves, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, to honor you, to keep you safe through storm and calm for all the days of my life. Amelia's voice was steady despite the tears in her eyes. I, Amelia Reeves, take you, Yates Zimmerman, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, to stand beside you, to build a life with you at the edge of the world for all the days of my life. When Reverend Holt pronounced them man and wife, Yates kissed his bride with joy singing through his veins. This woman who had come to him through storm and disaster, who had brought light back into his life, was now his wife. They spent their wedding night in the small boarding house in Braziria, and Yates made love to his wife with tenderness and passion, both of them hungry for each other after the restraint of the past weeks. Amelia was inexperienced but eager, and Yates took his time, wanting her first time to be everything it should be. When she cried out his name in pleasure, clinging to him, Yates felt a fierce, possessive pride that this incredible woman was his. Afterward they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Amelia tracing patterns on his chest. I have a confession, she said. Another one, Yates asked, amused. When I was clinging to that piece of wood in the storm, I prayed. I told God that if He let me live, I would make my life count for something. I would find purpose and meaning. I think He answered my prayer. How so? She propped herself up on her elbow to look at him. I was traveling to Galveston to be dependent on my aunt, to hopefully find work teaching other people's children. It would have been a perfectly acceptable life. But here with you I have real purpose. We keep the light burning. We guard the ships. We make a difference. Yates pulled her close and kissed her forehead. I spent 5 years alone in that lighthouse, and I thought I had accepted that loneliness was just the price of the work. But you have shown me it does not have to be that way. We can do this together, Amelia. We can build something good. They returned to the lighthouse 3 days later, Morrison sailing them back across the choppy waters. The beacon stood dark against the afternoon sky, and Yates felt a pull of urgency to get it lit again. As soon as they were settled, he climbed the stairs and got the light burning, the familiar routine soothing after days away. Amelia made the keeper's quarters truly feel like home. She hung curtains she had sewn from fabric purchased in Braziria. She organized Yates's haphazard collection of books into some semblance of order. She filled a jar with wildflowers from the scrubby grassland behind the lighthouse. Small changes, but they transformed the space from a solitary man's functional dwelling into a home for two. The first few weeks of marriage were an adjustment, learning to live with another person, to navigate the small irritations and compromises that came with sharing space. Yates had a tendency to track sand everywhere, and Amelia was fanatical about keeping the floors clean. Amelia liked to stay up late reading, while Yates preferred to rise with the sun. But they worked through it with patience and humor, and the rewards far outweighed the challenges. They developed routines. Amelia took over the afternoon light checks, freeing Yates to focus on maintenance work around the lighthouse. They cooked together, Yates preparing the fish and game while Amelia handled the vegetables and baking. In the evenings, they would sit together in the lamp room, watching the beam rotate, talking about their days or reading aloud to each other. And at night, they came together with a passion that never seemed to dim. Yates marveled at how perfectly Amelia fit against him, how her sighs and gasps drove him to heights of pleasure he had never imagined. She was uninhibited in their marriage bed, eager to explore and learn, and Yates was a patient and attentive teacher. 3 months after their wedding, Amelia began to feel ill in the mornings. At first she thought it was something she had eaten, but when it continued day after day, realization dawned. She waited until she was certain before telling Yates, choosing a quiet evening when they sat together watching the sunset. "I have news," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." Yates stared at her, the information taking a moment to penetrate. Then a slow, wondering smile spread across his face. "A baby, truly, truly," Amelia confirmed, laughing at his expression. "In about 6 months, if my calculations are correct. How do you feel about becoming a father?" Yates pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "Terrified," he admitted, "and happier than I have any right to be. A child, Amelia, our child." "We will have to make arrangements," Amelia said practically, though he could hear the emotion in her voice. "I should probably go to the mainland for the birth, stay with a doctor nearby." "We will figure it out," Yates promised. "Together." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Amelia bloomed with it, her skin glowing, her body rounding with their growing child. Yates was endlessly fascinated by the changes, by the way his baby moved under his palm when he laid his hand on her belly. He found himself talking to the child, telling it stories about the lighthouse and the sea, about its grandfather who had kept the light before him. They prepared the keeper's quarters as best they could, converting a storage closet into a small nursery. Yates built a cradle from driftwood, sanding it smooth and lining it with blankets Amelia knitted during the long evenings. Morrison brought supplies from the mainland, delighted to be part of the preparations. When Amelia was 7 months along, they made the difficult decision that she should go to Braziria to stay with the minister's wife until the baby came. Yates hated the separation, but he knew it was the safest choice. He accompanied her to the mainland and stayed 2 days to ensure she was settled, then returned alone to the lighthouse. The next 2 months were the longest of his life. The lighthouse felt emptier than it ever had before, even during his bachelor years. Yates threw himself into work, repainting the tower, making repairs he had been putting off, anything to keep his mind occupied. Morrison brought letters from Amelia each week, and Yates read them so many times the paper grew soft. The message finally came on a bright April morning in 1879. Morrison sailed up to the lighthouse at dawn, calling out before his boat even reached the dock. "It is a boy. A healthy baby boy, and Amelia is doing well." Yates nearly fell down the lighthouse stairs in his haste to get to the boat. He peppered Morrison with questions the whole way to Braziria, and the old sailor laughed at his excitement. "Never thought I would see the day when Yates Zimmerman would be a nervous father," Morrison said. "But here we are." Amelia was sitting up in bed when Yates arrived at the minister's house, their son in her arms. She looked tired but radiant, and when she smiled at him, Yates felt his heart might burst from his chest. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Yates approached almost reverently, looking down at the tiny red-faced baby swaddled in blankets. He had a shock of dark hair and his eyes were squeezed shut, his little fists waving in the air. "He is perfect," Yates breathed. "Amelia, he is perfect. Would you like to hold him?" Yates had held newborn calves and foals, but a human baby seemed infinitely more fragile. Still, he carefully took his son into his arms, supporting the small head the way Amelia showed him. The baby's eyes opened, dark and unfocused, and Yates fell completely in love. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I am your father. I have been waiting to meet you." They had discussed names extensively during the pregnancy. Amelia wanted to honor Yates's father, and so they named their son Zane Thomas Zimmerman, Thomas having been the old lighthouse keeper's name. When Amelia was strong enough to travel, they returned to the lighthouse as a family. Yates had worried about raising a child in such an isolated place, but Amelia dismissed his concerns. "He will have the sea and the sky," she said. "He will have parents who love him. He will have fresh air and freedom. Many children have far less." Zane thrived in the lighthouse. He was a good baby, rarely fussing, seeming content to watch the play of light through the windows or listen to the sound of the waves. Yates would hold him in the lamp room at night, the beacon rotating around them, and tell his son about the ships they were protecting, the lives they were saving. Amelia adapted to motherhood with the same competence she brought to everything else. She nursed Zane while reading thick novels, managed to keep the lighthouse running smoothly with a baby on her hip, and still found time to tend her garden. Yates marveled at her strength and capability. Life settled into a new rhythm. The days were full of work and the demands of an infant, but there was joy in it. Yates would come in from repairs to find Amelia singing to Zane, and the sound would fill him with such contentment that he had to pause and give thanks for his good fortune. When Zane was 6 months old, they received unexpected visitors. A cattle drive was passing through the area, and several of the cowboys rode out to the lighthouse to get a look at the ocean. Yates recognized one of them immediately. "Jack Harper," he said, shaking the man's hand. "It has been years." "Yates Zimmerman," Jack replied with a grin. "Heard you were keeping a lighthouse out here, but I had to see it to believe it. You always said you would never settle down." "Plans change," Yates said, gesturing for the men to come up to the keeper's quarters. Amelia had Zane in her arms, and she smiled warmly at the cowboys. "Gentlemen, this is my wife Amelia and our son Zane." The cowboys were respectful, removing their hats and offering polite greetings, but Jack's eyebrows had climbed nearly to his hairline. "Married with a baby," he said. "Never thought I would see the day. You were the one who said family life was not for you, that you needed to keep moving." "I was wrong," Yates said simply. "I found something more important than moving. I found home." They fed the cowboys and listened to news from the trail, stories of stampedes and river crossings and the wild towns at the end of the line. It was strange to hear about that life again, to remember when he had lived it. Yates had loved those years, the freedom and the adventure, but he did not miss them. Not when he had this. After the cowboys left, Amelia came to stand beside him as they watched the men ride away. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Giving up that life?" "Not for a single moment," Yates said firmly. "That life was for a younger man who did not know what he wanted. I know now. I want you and Zane and this lighthouse. I want to wake up every morning beside you and fall asleep every night knowing you are safe. I want to teach our son about the tides and the stars. I want to grow old with you, Amelia." She leaned against him and he wrapped his arm around her waist. "I love you," she said. "I loved you from that first moment when you were so gentle with me, when I was terrified and hurt and you made me feel safe." "I love you too," Yates replied. "You brought light into my darkness. You made me whole." The years passed in a rhythm of tides and seasons. Zane grew into a bright, curious boy who loved the lighthouse as much as his father did. By the time he was 3, he could recite the lighting procedures and knew the names of every ship that passed within view. Amelia taught him to read and write, using the lighthouse logbook as practice, and he would carefully form his letters while Yates checked the beacon. When Zane was 4, Amelia discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she felt more confident about the process, and she arranged to have a midwife come stay at the lighthouse for the final month. Their daughter was born on a calm summer night in 1883, the lighthouse beam painting golden stripes across the walls as Amelia labored. Yates held her hand and whispered encouragement, and when their daughter finally arrived, red-faced and wailing, he cut the cord with shaking hands. They named her Area Rose, and she was every bit as perfect as her brother. Zane was fascinated by the tiny baby, wanting to help with everything, and Yates and Amelia encouraged his involvement. The lighthouse rang with the sounds of childhood now, laughter and running feet, and the occasional bout of tears. Raising two children in isolation had its challenges, but it also had unexpected benefits. Zane and Area were close in a way that surprised even Amelia, developing their own games and stories, entertaining each other for hours. They learned to fish with their father and garden with their mother. They grew strong and healthy from the fresh air and good food. When Zane turned 8, Yates began to teach him the real work of the lighthouse. The boy was still too small to do the heavy maintenance, but he could check the oil, trim the wicks, and help his father with the daily inspections. Zane took to it naturally, showing the same dedication that Yates's father had tried to instill in him all those years ago. Area was different from her brother, more interested in the living things around the lighthouse than the machinery. She collected shells and watched birds, learned the names of every plant in her mother's garden. Amelia taught her about tides and moon phases, about the way the natural world worked in cycles and patterns. One evening, when Zane was 10 and Area 6, they all sat in the lamp room watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Zane was asking questions about navigation, about how sailors used stars to find their way, and Yates was explaining the mathematics of it. Area tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mama, why do we live in a lighthouse? Why not in a town with other people?" Amelia smiled and pulled her daughter close. "Because this lighthouse is important. Your father and I, we have a responsibility to keep ships safe. And besides, we have everything we need right here. We have each other." "But do you not get lonely?" Area persisted. "I used to be lonely," Yates said, joining the conversation. "Before your mother came, I thought being alone was just part of this life. But then a storm came and I pulled a woman from the wreckage, and everything changed." "Tell us the story again," Zane begged. He had heard it dozens of times, but he never tired of it. So Yates told them about the storm and the shipwreck, about diving into the churning water and pulling Amelia to safety. He told them about the days that followed, about falling in love with their mother, about realizing that he had found his purpose not just in keeping the light but in building a life with her. "You saved Mama," Area said in wonder. "Actually," Amelia said, ruffling her daughter's hair, "your father saved me, but I think I saved him too. We saved each other." As the children grew older, they began to take on more responsibility. Zane officially became his father's assistant keeper, learning every aspect of the lighthouse operation. Area took over much of the garden work and began helping her mother with the cooking and household management. The family worked together as a unit, each person's contribution valued. When Zane was 16, a terrible storm rolled in, the worst Yates had seen since the night he had rescued Amelia. The lighthouse shook under the force of the wind, rain driving against the windows with such force that Yates worried the glass would shatter. He and Zane worked together to keep the light burning, climbing the stairs again and again to check the beacon, to make sure it stayed bright and true. Amelia and Area stayed in the keeper's quarters, securing loose items and watching anxiously out the window. When a piece of the tower's railing broke loose, threatening to damage the light, Yates and Zane went out into the storm to secure it. Amelia's heart was in her throat as she watched her husband and son battle the wind, tying down the railing with rope, their figures barely visible through the rain. They made it back inside safely, soaked and exhausted, and Amelia wrapped them both in blankets while Area made hot tea. The storm raged for another full day before finally blowing itself out, and when it was over, they surveyed the damage. Shingles torn from the roof, part of the garden destroyed, the small dock where they moored their boat damaged. But the lighthouse stood strong, and the light had never faltered. "We did it," Zane said, grinning despite his exhaustion. "We kept the light burning." Yates clapped his son on the shoulder, pride swelling in his chest. "You did well. Your grandfather would have been proud." In 1891, when Zane was 18 and Area 14, a decision had to be made. The government was upgrading lighthouses along the coast, offering better pay and support for keepers. But they wanted to assign a new keeper to the lighthouse where Yates had spent his entire adult life. They offered him a position at a larger lighthouse further down the coast, with a real keeper's house instead of just attached quarters. It was Zane who made the decision easier. "Let me stay," he said to his father. "Let me be the keeper here. I know this lighthouse as well as you do, and I want to carry on the family tradition. You and Mama and Area can take the new position. Start fresh." Yates looked at his son, seeing not a boy but a capable young man ready to take on responsibility. It was hard to let go, hard to imagine leaving this place that held so many memories. But he also knew that clinging too tightly to the past meant missing the future. "You are sure?" Yates asked. "I am sure," Zane said firmly. "This is where I belong." So they made the transition. The government approved Zane as the new keeper, impressed by his knowledge and dedication. Yates spent 2 months training his son on the official procedures, though Zane already knew most of them by heart. And then, on a bright spring morning, Yates and Amelia and Area loaded their belongings onto Morrison's boat and sailed away from the lighthouse that had been their home for so many years. Amelia cried as they left, watching the tower grow smaller in the distance. Yates held her hand, his own eyes suspiciously bright. But Area was excited about the adventure, about seeing new places and meeting new people. The new lighthouse was on Matagorda Island, a larger operation with a proper house, and even a small community of other lighthouse keepers' families nearby. It was an adjustment after years of isolation, but not an unwelcome one. Area thrived with other children her age to socialize with, and Amelia enjoyed having neighbors. Yates poured himself into the work, training a new assistant keeper and modernizing the operations. But part of his heart remained at the old lighthouse, and he made sure to visit Zane regularly. His son was doing well, proving himself to be an excellent keeper, and Yates swelled with pride every time Morrison brought news. When Area was 17, a young man from one of the neighboring keeper families began courting her. His name was William, and he was polite and hardworking, clearly smitten with Area. Yates and Amelia watched the courtship carefully, wanting to ensure their daughter was making a good choice. "He reminds me of you," Amelia said one evening as they watched William and Area walk along the beach together. "Serious about his work, but gentle underneath." "Should I be flattered or concerned?" Yates asked. Amelia laughed. "Flattered. You turned out quite well, as I recall." They were married in 1895, a beautiful ceremony in the small church in the nearest town. Zane came for the wedding, and it was the first time the whole family had been together in years. Seeing his children grown and happy, Yates felt a deep sense of accomplishment. This was what he and Amelia had built, not just a family but a legacy. The years continued to pass. Yates and Amelia grew older, their hair turning gray, lines deepening around their eyes. But they remained devoted to each other, their love deepening with time rather than fading. They had weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical, and they had come through stronger for it. In 1902, after 24 years of service at the Matagorda Island Lighthouse, Yates retired. He was 53 years old, and his body was beginning to feel the wear of decades of hard physical work. The government offered him a pension, modest but enough to live on, and he and Amelia decided to settle in the small town of Alpine, Texas. Alpine was different from the coastal communities they had known, situated in the high desert with mountains rising in the distance. But it had a certain stark beauty, and the climate was good for Amelia's joints, which had begun to ache in the coastal humidity. They bought a small house with a garden, and Amelia immediately set to work making it bloom. Zane continued as keeper at the original lighthouse, and Aria and William had taken a position at a lighthouse in Louisiana, where they were raising 3 children. Yates and Amelia visited when they could, traveling by train to the coast to see their grandchildren, to watch the next generation grow up with the sea in their blood. Retirement suited them. Yates kept busy with carpentry projects, building furniture and fixing things around the house. Amelia joined the local women's group and started a lending library out of their home. They had friends and community in a way they never had during their lighthouse years, but they never forgot where they came from. On quiet evenings, they would sit on their porch and watch the sunset over the mountains, and Yates would take Amelia's hand. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked one evening. "The lighthouse." "Every day," Amelia admitted, "but I do not regret leaving. We had our time there, and it was good." "Now we have this time, and it is good too. We have been blessed, Yates." "We have," he agreed. "That night I pulled you from the water, I thought I was just saving a life. I did not know I was saving my own." Amelia leaned her head on his shoulder. "We saved each other. And we built something beautiful together." In 1910, Zane wrote to tell them he was engaged. The woman's name was Margaret, and she was the daughter of a ship captain who had been making regular runs past the lighthouse for years. Yates and Amelia traveled to the coast for the wedding, and Yates felt a pang as he saw the lighthouse again. It looked the same but different, Zane's touches visible in the fresh paint and the expanded garden. "You have done well," Yates told his son. "This place, it looks better than it ever did when I was keeping it." "I learned from the best," Zane said simply. At the wedding, surrounded by family and friends, watching Zane and Margaret exchange vows in front of the lighthouse that had been in their family for over 30 years, Yates felt the circle complete itself. He looked at Amelia, still beautiful to him even with silver in her hair and lines on her face, and knew that every decision he had made had been the right one. They returned to Alpine and settled back into their peaceful routine. Years passed in contentment, marked by visits from children and grandchildren, by the changing seasons in the high desert, by the quiet joy of a long marriage built on love and respect. In 1918, Yates celebrated his 69th birthday. He was slowing down, his body finally giving in to age, but his mind remained sharp. Amelia was 64, and though she moved a bit slower than she once had, she was still the vibrant woman he had pulled from the sea 40 years before. They sat on their porch that evening, watching the stars come out in the vast Texas sky. Amelia had made Yates's favorite dinner, and they had eaten in comfortable silence, the kind that only came from decades of companionship. "I have been thinking about that storm," Amelia said suddenly. "The one that wrecked the Gulf Star. What about it? I used to wonder why I survived when so many others did not, why the captain and crew died while I lived. It seemed arbitrary, cruel even. And now," Yates asked, "now I think maybe there was a reason. Maybe I survived so I could be here with you, so we could raise our children and build this life together. Maybe all those moments of chance and choice led us to exactly where we needed to be." Yates considered this. "I do not know if I believe in destiny," he said slowly. But I do know that pulling you from that water was the most important thing I ever did. Not because it was heroic, but because it led me to you. You gave me purpose, Amelia. Before you, I was just maintaining a light. After you, I was building something that mattered." "We built it together," Amelia reminded him. "Everything we have, we made together." "Together," Yates agreed, squeezing her hand. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars wheel overhead. Yates thought about the journey they had taken, from that stormy night in 1878 to this peaceful evening 40 years later. He thought about their children and grandchildren, about the legacy they had created. And he felt grateful for every moment, even the difficult ones, because they had led him here. In 1920, Yates fell ill. It started as a cough that would not go away, and by spring it had developed into pneumonia. The doctor said his lungs were weak from years of breathing sea air and damp. And at 71, his body did not have the strength to fight off infection the way it once had. Amelia nursed him devotedly, but they both knew he was fading. On a warm May afternoon, with Amelia sitting beside his bed holding his hand, Yates looked at his wife and smiled. "I've had a good life," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Better than I ever imagined. Thank you for that." Tears streamed down Amelia's face. "Do not thank me. We did it together, remember, always together." "Together," Yates repeated. He closed his eyes, still holding her hand. "I love you, Amelia, from that first moment until this last one." "I love you too," she whispered. "My cowboy, my lighthouse keeper, my home." Yates Zimmerman passed peacefully that afternoon, surrounded by the love he had spent his life building. Amelia sat with him for a long time afterward, holding his hand and remembering the storm that had brought them together, the lighthouse that had been their sanctuary, the children they had raised, and the life they had created from nothing but chance and choice and love. At the funeral, their children spoke about their father. Zane told stories about learning to tend the lighthouse, about the storms they had weathered together. Aria talked about his gentle patience, about the way he had made their isolated childhood feel like an adventure. The grandchildren, some of whom barely remembered him, listened to the stories and learned about the man who had started it all. Amelia lived another 12 years, filling her days with her children and grandchildren, with her garden and her books and her community. But part of her was always waiting, counting the days until she could be with Yates again. When she died in 1932 at the age of 78, it was peacefully in her sleep. Her family found her in the morning with a smile on her face, and they liked to think she was dreaming of the lighthouse, of the man who had pulled her from the wreckage and shown her what love could be. They buried her next to Yates in the Alpine Cemetery under a stone that reads simply, "Amelia Zimmerman, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, found in the storm, loved for a lifetime." The lighthouse where it all began continued to operate for another 30 years, kept by Zane and then by his son after him, before finally being automated and eventually decommissioned. But the legacy of Yates and Amelia Zimmerman lived on in their descendants, in the stories passed down through generations, in the understanding that sometimes the worst storms bring the greatest blessings. Their love story became a family legend. The tale of the lonely cowboy turned lighthouse keeper who dove into a storm to save a drowning woman, and how that single act of courage changed both their lives forever. How they built a family and a legacy from nothing but love and dedication. How they proved that even at the edge of the world, in the most isolated places, happiness could be found if you were brave enough to reach for it. Zane's grandson, another Thomas Zimmerman, eventually wrote a book about his great-grandparents, based on the journals they had kept and the stories the family had preserved. The book told the whole story, from that stormy night in 1878 to the quiet endings decades later. It spoke of love and purpose, of finding home in unexpected places, of building something that lasted. At the book's launch, old photographs were displayed. Yates standing tall and serious beside his lighthouse. Amelia with her dark hair and determined expression. The two of them together, older and gray but still holding hands, still looking at each other with obvious devotion. Their children and grandchildren surrounding them in a portrait that spoke of family and love. The final chapter of the book included an excerpt from Amelia's journal, written on their 40th wedding anniversary in 1918. I have been thinking today about that terrifying night when the Gulf Star went down, when I was certain I would die. I remember the cold water, the way my strength was failing, the certainty that I would slip beneath the waves and be lost forever. And then there was Yates, solid and strong, pulling me to safety. At the time, I thought he had simply saved my life. I did not realize he had saved my soul as well. These 40 years with him have been everything I never knew I needed. We have weathered storms and raised children and built a life from nothing but determination and love. I was traveling to Galveston seeking a new beginning, but I found so much more. I found home. I found purpose. I found the other half of my heart. If I could go back to that terrified young woman clinging to wreckage in the storm, I would tell her this: hold on. Help is coming. And when it arrives in the form of a lonely lighthouse keeper with kind eyes and gentle hands, do not let go. Because that man will give you everything you have been searching for and so much more than you ever dreamed possible. We saved each other that night, Yates and I, and we have been saving each other every day since. The book ended with those words, a testament to a love that had begun in chaos and ended in peace, that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. It was the story of two people who found each other when they needed it most, who built something beautiful in an unlikely place, who proved that purpose and love could be found anywhere if you were willing to reach for it. Yates Zimmerman had been a cowboy who became a lighthouse keeper, a lonely man who found his purpose in the arms of a woman he pulled from the wreckage. Amelia Reeves had been a woman fleeing one life and searching for another, who found everything she needed in the man who saved her. Together, they had created a legacy that lasted long after they were gone, a love story that reminded everyone who heard it that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, and that true love, once found, can weather any storm.